black was cool. It really was, in terms of pop culture, because we did not have projects nearby us. We did not have to deal with those contrasting realities. We really didn't have to confront any of that. So black was cool. Black was like, man, this is the ultimate in artistic talent and cool, because we were just white people.
White people.
It's okay being white. It's all right. It's all right.
No, right.
But I must say, I have to echo Todd's question to Susan, back to you, though. So what happened when you left that enclave of whiteness and you finally got in a multiracially diverse place? And were there tensions there? Because like you spent all of your formative childhood years around white people and kind of learned about Black people at a distance.
Yeah.
And then now, bam, they're in your face. Marin wanted to explore something with Susan and ask her a question and maybe kick things off this evening.
Gosh, couldn't write to it. Hi, Susan. Hi, sure. I'm hoping that I remember my question perfectly, but I just had, your background just seemed so really interesting to me, and I'm interested in like almost just how your perceptions and opinions have evolved given the environment that you grew up in. Not only, thank you so much for sharing, some of the different comments and bigotries and things like that you experienced. But also I kind of got the impression that your community was not very, integrated, and you were not exposed on a day-to-day basis to people of a lot of different cultural backgrounds. So I'm really interested in how you kind of went about exploring that and how those around you really responded to it.
Oh, interesting. There's a lot in that. But thank you for asking. Yeah, so I told you guys a little bit last time about, growing up in a very segregated city of Atlanta, and the Black area of town was, considered to be unsafe, and it was really. And
what was unsafe about it?
Crime, high crime. And a white person in that neighborhood, you might be, I don't know, I felt like you might be extra targeted if you were there, because you look like you don't belong. And
this was the 1970s.
Yeah, coming of age was my 1970s in Atlanta. Yeah, and I lived in a suburb. So, and then yes, and then also when I went to college in downtown Atlanta at Georgia Tech, and the housing projects were right next door. So like literally a block from my dorm room was where the project started, and it was a big housing project, and it was really an unsafe area. It was bad. It was really bad, and it overflowed onto our campus.
Was that your first interaction with Black people? Like when you went to college, where you saw
Probably.
them kind of on a consistent basis?
Yeah. And there were some people in the school, not that many Black people at Georgia Tech. It was, still more white and Asian, probably, mostly white. But then there was a housing project that was all Black, and it was very unsafe. There were shootings there all the time, and on campus there were people that I know. I was in a group of people that was shot at one night.
Wow.
Yeah, and another friend was abducted and beaten, and there are bad things that happened all around us, and some people were shot and killed, or mugged, whatever. So you just had to be really on your guard. So I was just kind of lived in this state of just being on guard all the time, a state of vigilance, I guess you could say. And still didn't interact that much with Black people, except that I got involved in stuff in college. And so I interacted. I got some friends who were Black, which was great. And we had a great time together. We took some trips together, mixed group of people. So, when things in the media started to change. And so my perceptions kind of opened up as I grew up. I think I still probably harbored bigoted feelings for, some time in my life. I can't really say when, it might have faded away. and maybe it hasn't faded away. Maybe, it's probably still there. I think we're all bigoted in some way. So, but just trying to become more aware as I grew up, and just seeing images in the media helped, positive role models, in the media. Oh, I meant to mention, in high school, the TV show Roots, there was this miniseries called Roots.
Oh, we know what it is.
And I don't think anybody here is old enough to remember that.
Oh, no, we've all seen it. We know what it is.
Okay, but I saw it in real time. Like, I was in high school, and it was required viewing. Andre, you're not as old as me. You couldn't be. There's no way.
But no, it was required viewing, I believe, when I was in 4th or 5th grade.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so I watched Roots in school. And
okay, well, good. I'm glad, because that really changed. Yeah,
that did happen.
That was a seminal moment and eye-opening, and everybody, like the whole country, it was just a moment when we're all watching the same thing and all learning things we never knew before. So that was just really, really changed my views a lot. And in fact, it's funny, during the pandemic, my husband and I were searching for things to watch, and we ended up streaming Roots again, just to see how does it look through eyes now.
How did you respond to it? Yeah, now and later in life, because
it's just really hokey. I mean, it's overacted and kind of corny dialogue, but so that's what we think now. But back then, it was in the 70s. That was really changing, and we talked about it in school. So that was informative. Eventually I graduated from college and moved to California, I think I mentioned before, and just being in a multicultural metropolis like Los Angeles, boy, changed me. It started to break down that fear. I mean, I think I still had fear being in areas where I was like, oh, I'm obviously the minority here, and feeling that discomfort or fear. And I actually worked in South Central LA, to the point where during the Rodney King riots, again, some people I knew were shot at. Some people where I work, they were crossing the street. We were all trying to get home, because everybody told us, go home, it's not safe out there. So some people that I work where I did got shot at and hit. So a couple of them got shot. So that was a scary time. So, and I was also getting ideas in my head from some conservative media. So I started to sort of get this more libertarian conservative bent as I was growing older. And I was listening to Larry Elder, and back then, Larry Elder was a different Larry Elder than he is now. He was not, I don't recognize the man anymore, really. Like, I don't know who that man is, but I was listening to Larry Elder that was saying, stop being a victim. Like, everybody's walking around with these victim mentalities or victocrats. So just stop it. That was his big thing. And just, lift yourself up, the bootstraps and everything. So I was listening to a lot of that. And I read Shelby Steele, he came out with the content of our character. I think it was just one of his first big books. So I read that. And a lot of that was getting into my head. So thinking, well, people just need to really learn how to lift themselves up and get themselves out of bad situations. So that thought process was percolating in my brain for many years. And then, I guess it slowly evolved where I think now, I don't know, I feel like I'm rambling, but
no, you're not. We're taking it all in.
All this stuff influenced me. I just have to say, all of these things I remember influencing my thoughts. And
Susan, can I ask a specific question?
Yeah.
Just to take it back, so you mentioned some kind of pivotal moments. You mentioned Roots. You mentioned going to college. You mentioned coming out to LA, to California, as these kind of seminal moments where your world was opened up, more than it had been. And I'm just curious, you growing up and hearing what you heard in your community, right? Kind of outright, what you describe as kind of outright bigotry, right?
Yeah.
And then you get put in these new environments. How do you reconcile, like, how do you experience that?
You have a lot of dichotomies going on, girl.
Yeah, right. You hear stuff that you've heard, but then you're meeting people in college, or even before that in high school, you're watching Roots, and you're like, how do you make sense of what you heard and then what you saw as you had these seminal experiences?
I think I was more open to change and acceptance when I heard new information that had me change my thoughts, because I studied science. I mean, my field of study was physics. And so I always had a scientific mindset, and I'm always been taught to, when you see information, when you're presented with information that's, not what you thought, but that's the new truth, you accept it because, it's true. And so I think I've I might have been more accepting over the years of okay, you know, changing my way of thought when I got new information a little more easily because of that. So I just don't think it wasn't any single moment that I felt changed. Just like as I got new information, I took it in and like, oh, okay, I think I was looking at that wrong, you know, and then hearing about Jim Crow and redlining and learning more about that as an adult, which I didn't learn about at all as a kid. Okay, that's new information. I take that in and I change my view a little bit. Yeah. And then hearing, you know, hearing some counter voices to the Larry Elder types and hearing some voices on the other side, like, oh, okay, now that it's all feeding into this, like Landon said last time, it's a narrative that's going on in my head that's constantly evolving as I get new information. And you guys are part of that too. This is another seminal moment for me and getting more input on this. And also being part of Braver Angels, I started reading books that we had conversations about. So I read Caste and White Fragility and White Guilt, and I forget, there's several books about race that we read, and that opened me up too. So
what about your first meaningful kind of interactions with Black people when you were older? So as you were growing up, so you heard what you heard, you also experienced kind of danger in another neighborhood and danger outside of Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Like, so it sounded like you were, I think you used the word on guard.
Yeah.
But then you have your first interactions with Black people in a more intimate way. How did you feel? Did you bring those nerves into it, or was it just easy to relate to someone? Like, how did you experience that? Because I feel like sometimes there's information, like we could have ideas in our head, but it's like when you really meet somebody or, you know, interact with them in a deeper way, that some of our socialization can come out or change. And I'm wondering how you experience that.
It does. I mean, you have some apprehension because, I mean, this is like, oh, okay, this is something new, and I have all this
eased that tension
in my mind.
Something eased that tension where you started to get comfortable.
Well, just getting to know people, just spending more time with them. You know, just exposure. I think that's all. And just like, hey, we're kind of the same. We kind of have sometimes, you know, other people are on guard too. I mean, they're afraid in some of the same situations that I'm afraid in. You know, it's like, oh, okay, you know, and you feel like the more exposure you have, the more you realize you have in common, and you don't need to be so scared or on guard or apprehensive. That's it, really. Although, and I learned, and working in South Central, it was a bad neighborhood, and I just learned you have to kind of just it was a bad neighborhood. We just had to be aware. You know, I mean, so I'd go out for lunch and I'd just be aware of where I am because, you know, there were carjackings going on and stuff like that. And I just had to just be aware, you know. Yeah.
How does that, Landon, how does that compare to kind of your experience? Because you talked about your background was a little bit different, where, I mean, I don't know if you heard outright bigotry in the same way that Susan did, but you described more a learning of history as if, you know, hey, we're done, right? We had slavery, we had the Civil War, we won it, civil rights, we're good, we're done, you know, and this sense of pride. And you shared a couple of things. One, you shared maybe as you went to college or went out in the world, you learned more of the history that kind of changed your, you know, some of your views, or maybe made your views more nuanced. But you also kind of specifically talked about learning rap and kind of hearing what you heard and having feelings about that. And I'm just curious, what was your evolution like in the same way as you started to, let's say, learn new things? What were those initial reactions to rap? And when you came to a different narrative than what you learned in school, like, how did you experience that? Or what was your evolution in that way?
Yeah. I grew up, what I would say is pretty much non-exposed to race. You know, it was just mostly, it was a lower to middle class area nearby a copper mine, copper smelter. We were the poor part of town. I had no problem with that. My parents grew up from very poor backgrounds. So I didn't really hear that much about race. I had friends who were Mexican. That was my experience with race growing up. But we were all kind of the same class, you know. But yeah, I had a pride in American history. I did, because, you know, it was a very non-complicated version. and I learned about a lot of American people growing up, including prominent Black Americans. And I was just...
What was said about them? Those prominent Black Americans you learned about, what was told to you about them?
Oh, Frederick Douglass, he was it was probably a 30-page book that cast him as a brave hero in American history. And also Harriet Tubman was kind of one of my heroes, because I thought, wow, that's one of the most amazing people that I could ever meet. And people that broke the color barrier were particularly prominent in my mind. Jackie Robinson was, someone that I really looked up to in sports, and so, that's why I saw them in those stories, and I was like, wow, we had brave people like this, and they broke these barriers, and now, I didn't learn enough of the complications that happened. Like Jim Crow was I didn't really learn that much about Jim Crow. I didn't learn about what was happening while I was growing up to Black Americans. So then when I got older and started reading more history, especially about Jim Crow, initially it was really uncomfortable. What was
uncomfortable for you?
Just learning that this was going on while we were supposedly a whole nation. We were a nation that had this united vision that I understood as I understood America. And this was actually happening while supposedly we had come together as a nation and defeated slavery. And, in some ways, I thought we had decided to overcome racism as a nation. I thought that I did the whole idea that people would be judged, any aspect of their character would be determined by their race, was, to me, seemed like an alien idea. I never understood it growing up. So to realize that was actually the actual facts on the ground, was that this was actually the case.
Did that make you more aware and seeing it around you? So after you learned about Jim Crow, for example, now you start to see instances of racial bias and actions that were negative toward Black people around you? Were you more cognizant?
Yeah, so I didn't have enough Black people around me to really make those observations, Andre. I did see Black people in pop culture. And Black people were a major part of pop culture, even in super white Utah.
Really?
Yeah, everybody wanted to be loved rap. That was really popular, even long ago.
You had, before Eminem, there were white boys wanting to be rappers.
Yeah, no, they want to be rappers. They want to dress like rappers. And
were you one of them?
that was not one of them.
I'm just putting you on.
But you listen to the Beastie Boys is pretty much what Landon is saying.
Yeah.
And that's cool. But I like some Beastie Boys too.
Yeah, right. I was not, but Black was cool. It really was, in terms of pop culture, because we did not have projects nearby us. We did not have to deal with those contrasting realities. We really didn't have to confront any of that. So Black was cool. Black was like, man, this is the ultimate in artistic talent and cool, because we were just white people.
White people.
It's okay being white. It's all right. It's all right.
No, right.
I must say, I have to echo Todd's question to Susan, back to you though. So what happened when you left that enclave of whiteness and you finally got in a multiracially diverse place? And were there tensions there? Because you spent all of your formative childhood years around white people and kind of learned about Black people at a distance.
Yeah.
And then now, bam, they're in your face.
Right.
What did you do?
I came to California, at San Diego, but I was in higher education. I was in graduate school and postdoctoral studies for forever. So even then, like, there's not that many Black people. I played basketball with a few. And all I know is I wanted to interact with the Black people, the few of them that there were. I wanted to show my support. That was always what I felt inside me, is how could I, you know, it's not like I was, I just, if I have the opportunity, I want to be friends with them. That's it. Because, you know, being at a distance and learning what I knew from a distance, I was like, well, we all need to support these Black people. And that was kind of as far as it got for me, you know. So, you know, I didn't have to live near dangerous areas or black and white contrasting suburbs or anything like that. Still, even in San Diego, I can go downtown and there's some Black areas there. But still, I just don't have tremendous exposure to Black communities.
One last follow-up question, and then I, you know, just want to see what other questions y'all have, and Marin, since you were the genesis of this, kind of how you and Marcus as well, how you kind of take it all in. You had talked about kind of Black is cool, but then I know during the first conversation you also had feelings come up about the kind of things that were talked about in rap, and you're like, well, maybe this is not the way we want to be, and I'm just curious. Yes. I'm curious. Well, you know, what were you responding to that kind of stirred emotions, one, and then two, as you learned more of, let's say, the complicated history, did that give you any different vantage point of maybe what was expressed through rap? Or I guess, how did you come to kind of process that all? Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't think that cool was actually, I never really thought that cool was like smart. I was kind of on the outside of that when I was a kid. I really never got drawn into, you know, pop culture. It never really appealed to me. But a lot of my friends definitely loved it. And, you know, I disagreed with glorification of violence in music. I really disagree.
Let's get specific, Landon, because I'm thinking like, and Marin, you help me out because you know music way better than I do. So you're talking about like NWA, N-word, I'm just gonna say niggas with attitude, right? And so that's sort of aggressive thing of like, we got to take these streets, fuck the cops, all of that. That's what turned you off, Landon? Well, that was, I mean, I didn't listen to NWA. I often saw rap on MTV and had, you know, I was very, Utah has its very strict moral codes, sexual moral codes included, right? And, you know, so those violated the moral codes that I had been taught growing up in a lot of ways. They were just foreign to me. So I never thought that was, you know, a healthy way to think, but I didn't have background on it either. And to answer Todd's question, as I got older, I started to realize that, oh, if you fill in the backstory here, then you start to see what these people, NWA, what are they expressing and where is it actually coming from? Then I started to be like, oh, wow, this is incredible resentment in some ways being expressed. And it is, you know, it is feelings that have accumulated over, you know, centuries, basically, that are coming out here. And I was like, okay, I understand. but yeah, growing up, it was very foreign to me. Marin and Marcus, how do you take that all in, and how does it relate to your background? And, you know, before we open it up to other conversation, other questions.
It didn't really surprise me that much, because I can say even in my really kind of white suburban environment, I felt like, you know, Black culture, whether it was through music or TV shows, and I was coming up in the era, like when I was in high school, like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Martin and all those sorts of shows were on, and my white classmates definitely liked them and thought they were funny, and sometimes really, really tried to use them to relate to me in a way that did not work. I mean, because it was different than your experience, or well, because to them, that was the measure of that's what being Black is.
Black is.
And I was a lot more of a Huxtable kid. I studied classical piano for 20 years. So a lot of the questions I would get were like, well, Marin, why aren't you like, real Black people? Or they would try to say things like, oh, well, like, I'm more Black than Marin because I know all the characters are Martin because I didn't really watch Martin that much. Like things like that. Like that was their measure of what being Black was. So it was kind of weird. Mm-hmm. But also it felt as if like it was comfortable because it was entertainment. Whereas in our academic environments, like I graduated top of my class, and that made a lot of the same students who thought Martin was really cool, really angry. And would even get similar sentiments from talking, to my parents as they were growing respective businesses and things like that, that there was kind of this sentiment of, it's great if we're running up and down a field or court, but don't try to own the team. It's great when you're on the talk show, but don't try to, own the production company and compete in business. Oh, it's great when you're, and this is also why my parents were very, very strict on making sure my brothers and I were not like class clowns and things like that, because they were just like, that's what's expected. You're supposed to have the funny one-liners and you're supposed to whatever, where it's just like, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to go in there and compete academically. So it was interesting seeing that, it was kind of a cool, but cool in a certain context.
How did you experience that anger? How did you experience that? Like, was it anger because they're competitive, or did you feel that the anger was projected towards you because you were Black and on top?
Well, first of all, I didn't really understand it, and actually until I was older. I mean, because again, look, a lot of this is reflecting back as now, a Black woman in my 40s, right? When I was in school, I wanted to fit in so badly, to the point that my, teachers and things like that would have to have conversations with my parents because they were concerned that I would start not speaking up as much in class, or I would be embarrassed if I got the A+ on the exam or whatever, because it was really clear that I was doing all I could to fit in, and they didn't want to see me compromise my academic performance to try to do that. Which, I mean, I know is common amongst kids of all different sorts of races, but that tended to be, the big concern. It was, I think the first time I got really angry was senior year of high school when college acceptances started coming in. Where, I went to the same high school for all 4 years. And at the end of every year, they would announce who had the highest GPA, and they would give out awards for who excelled in all the different subjects, like the most outstanding English student, that kind of a thing. And it was a joke amongst my classmates. Why do we even go? Marin sweeps the awards. And I did. And then, senior year came around, and I remember the big point of contention was when I got into Duke and one of my white male classmates didn't. And that was when I really felt the turn. And it was the whole, like, those schools have to let you in because you're Black. And then, looking back on it, some of it was parents. My parents told me, you're going to get in everywhere that you apply because you're Black. And that was when I got angry. I was like, y'all have seen me for the last 4 years. First of all, I tutored some of you over the last 4 years to help you pass certain classes. And then that's what it whittles down to. And honestly, that was when in my mind, I was like, I'm getting out of the state. And I intentionally chose not to attend any university in Texas.
May I ask a question? Because Landon and Susan, did any of that awareness, because Susan was at her university and Landon, you were in higher ed, does any of what Marin is sharing ever landed with you in your experience? Did you know that these were some of the things that Black people pursuing higher education were going through? And was there ever any sympathy that you witnessed in your backgrounds?
I didn't know. I honestly, I don't think I knew they would be going through something like what Marin described. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I heard only secondhand through the press that those kind of things happen. I did not witness it.
Yeah.
In my, I would say in higher ed, I went to school that was 85% liberal progressive. So it was pretty much unanimous that, we needed to diversify. We wanted to provide opportunities. We wanted to, so I can say that if any of us had the opportunity to assist in giving opportunities to Black people, we were all in, and that we were mostly very pro-Obama when that was during that time. And I was an Obama Democrat, so yeah. I again, it's all secondhand, there's not a lot of firsthand.
Yeah, and I was very much in favor of affirmative action back then, and I saw that as a really good thing. Mm-hmm. And then in the years, I guess, after in the workforce, after many years in the workforce, you start to see the effects of affirmative action. And
what effects did you see? What did you see?
More people of color in the workplace, and rising to positions where there's more power associated with it, more money and power. But then there's also there's the side too that Marin was talking about. Then people will say in the workplace, they'll say, oh, that person was just promoted in their job because they're Black, or because it's a woman or something like that. And, in some cases, maybe that's true. And I think maybe I got some advantages because I was a woman here and there. I mean, there's good and bad to that. And then there's also the bad part of affirmative action that'll put a target on your back that maybe people will think that you're there just because of that. So there's, all these things are nuanced. I mean, there's good and bad in all of it.
Thank you for watching this episode of Healing Race, and stay with us for a scene from our next video.
If you want to see more conversations like the one you just watched, please subscribe to our channel, share this video with friends and family, and like and comment on the video below.
If you'd like to be a guest on one of our episodes and have an open, real conversation about race, email us at guests@healingraceshow.com.
And if there are topics you think we should cover, we'd love to hear them. So please email your ideas to topics@healingraceshow.com.
As always, thanks for your support. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Now, here's a scene from our next Healing Race.
So I asked these questions to kind of set us up for the next portion. And this is one that I really want to direct with Marcus, because it's a tension that he and I have personally together, and I openly acknowledge it on this show. And it's one that I need to explore because I just don't know the answer. And I'm almost gonna literally read the question off the show notes, because is the historical messaging about race, Marcus, and everyone in the group that we've received, is that still relevant? Because I feel personally that I hold on to a little bit of what's in the past and maybe things that have been sort of Marin's experience, since that's the experience that's leading us into this next topic of conversation. So I hold on to the Marin's experiences and have this sort of beware, beware, beware signal in my mind. But then when you hear a Susan and a Landon talk, and it all sounds so good and gravy right now on the phone, it makes me ask myself, number one, is this just placation by Susan and Landon? Yeah, I'm going to be specific. And then number two, am I holding on to something I just need to let go of and times have changed? Marcus, I really want to know what you think about that.
Are you saying Marin's
I'm saying Marin's experience is valid, but maybe we need to maybe times have changed and maybe we need to kind of let it go? Or is it still happening in is it manifesting itself differently, but the motivation is the same in present day? To watch the rest of that episode, go ahead and click the video below me.
To see a different compelling Healing Race episode, you can click the video below me. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.